Step out of the vehicle, now.
Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?
This car was reported stolen. Out, now.
I can show you my registration.
I don't care if you're the King of England. Hands behind your back.
I'm a federal judge, and this
Sure you are. You're under arrest.
This is the moment that destroyed a career and exposed a truth that America still struggles to face. May 14th, 2022. A quiet Saturday afternoon in the upscale Riverside Heights neighborhood of Fairfax County, Virginia. What should have been a peaceful drive home became a nationally recognized civil rights case that would culminate in a $910,000 jury verdict, a decorated police officer, a federal judge, and a traffic stop that never should have happened. Officer Garrett thought he was just doing his job. He had no idea that the man he was about to handcuff and humiliate in front of an entire neighborhood was Judge Elijah Sterling, a 15-year veteran of the federal bench who had presided over some of the most high-profile cases in Virginia's history. The body camera captured everything, every word, every dismissive comment, every constitutional violation. And when the case went to trial, a jury of 12 ordinary citizens sent a message that reverberated through police departments across the nation. This is the story of how racial profiling, unchecked ego, and systemic bias collided with accountability. This is the story of the bench and the badge. Before we continue, I want to know, where are you watching this from? Drop your country or city in the comments right now. Are you from the USA, UK, Canada, or somewhere else? Let me know in the comment. And if you think accountability matters, hit that like button. Elijah Marcus Sterling was born in Richmond, Virginia in 1972. The son of a postal worker and a school teacher, Elijah grew up understanding that education and discipline were the only paths to breaking cycles of poverty and discrimination. He graduated summa cum laude from Howard University, then earned his law degree from Yale. But Elijah didn't chase corporate wealth. He became a public defender, spending 8 years representing those who couldn't afford representation. He saw firsthand how the justice system could fail people, particularly people of color. In 2007, at just 35 years old, Elijah Sterling was nominated to the federal bench. He was one of the youngest federal judges in Virginia's history. His confirmation was unanimous. Republicans praised his commitment to constitutional law. Democrats praised his compassion and fairness. For 15 years, Judge Sterling presided over high-stakes cases, corruption trials, organized crime prosecutions, civil rights lawsuits. He was known for 3 things: his razor-sharp legal mind, his unwavering impartiality, and his ability to command respect the moment he entered a courtroom. Colleagues called him the conscience of the bench. Attorneys, both prosecution and defense, knew that appearing before Judge Sterling meant the law would be applied fairly, without bias or favor. Elijah was married to Dr. Nia Sterling, a pediatric surgeon. They had 2 teenage daughters. The family lived in Riverside Heights, an affluent, predominantly white suburb of Fairfax County. Elijah drove a 2021 BMW 750i, a gift to himself after presiding over a landmark environmental justice case. He had worked hard his entire life. He had earned every single thing he owned. On May 14, 2022, Judge Sterling was driving home from his morning workout. He was wearing a fitted black athletic shirt and jeans. He was unarmed. He was listening to jazz. He was less than a mile from his home. He had absolutely no idea that the next 20 minutes would test everything he believed about the justice system he had dedicated his life to serving. Garrett Hayes was a 38-year-old patrol officer with the Fairfax County Police Department. He had been on the force for 12 years. On paper, Hayes was a decorated officer. He had received 3 commendations for bravery, including one for disarming a suspect during a domestic violence call. His arrest record was high. His supervisors praised his proactive approach to law enforcement. But there was another side to Garrett Hayes that didn't appear in official reports. Over his 12-year career, Hayes had been the subject of 14 internal complaints. 9 involved allegations of excessive force. 5 involved accusations of racial profiling. All 14 were dismissed or resulted in minor reprimands. A day's suspension here, a written warning there. Fellow officers described Hayes as old school and intense. Some admired his no-nonsense attitude. Others privately worried that his aggression would eventually cross a line. Hayes grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Baltimore. His father was a corrections officer. His uncle was a cop. Law enforcement was the family business. Hayes joined the police academy immediately after high school, driven by a desire to clean up the streets and not take any crap from anyone. But somewhere along the way, Hayes developed a pattern. He disproportionately stopped Black and Latino drivers. He was quick to escalate encounters. He saw suspicion where others saw normal behavior. His training records showed repeated notes about attitude issues and failure to de-escalate. But Hayes was never fired, never seriously disciplined. The system protected him. Until May 14, 2022. On that day, Hayes received a routine dispatch about a stolen BMW matching the description of a vehicle reported missing 3 days earlier. What Hayes didn't know or didn't bother to confirm was that the stolen vehicle report had been closed 48 hours prior. The car had been recovered. When Hayes saw Judge Elijah Sterling driving through Riverside Heights that afternoon, he saw what he always saw: a black man in a luxury car in a wealthy white neighborhood. And that was all the reason Garrett Hayes needed. I have a question for you. Do you think officers should face consequences for illegal stops? Or should they get away with it? Comment below with your thoughts. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button because we bring you real stories of justice and accountability every single week. Judge Elijah Sterling was driving eastbound on Riverside Parkway when he noticed the flashing lights in his rearview mirror. His first reaction wasn't panic, it was confusion. He had been driving 5 miles under the speed limit. His registration was current. His inspection sticker was valid. He wasn't on his phone, he had done absolutely nothing wrong. But Elijah Sterling had been a black man in America for 50 years. He knew the protocol. He pulled over immediately. He turned off the engine. He placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. He waited. Officer Garrett Hayes approached the driver's side window with his hand resting on his service weapon. His body camera was recording. At exactly 2:49 p.m., Hayes tapped on the window. Elijah lowered it slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Good afternoon, officer," Elijah said calmly. "May I ask why I've been stopped?" Hayes didn't answer the question. Instead, he leaned down and peered into the vehicle. "License and registration," Hayes demanded. "Of course," Elijah replied. "My license is in my wallet in my back pocket. My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them slowly." "Don't move," Hayes snapped. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Elijah froze. "Officer, I need to retrieve my documents." "How would you like me to do that?" Hayes stared at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Step out of the vehicle." 2:51 p.m. the escalation. This is where everything began to spiral. Elijah remained calm. "Officer, I'd be happy to comply, but I'd like to know the reason for this stop. I don't believe I've violated any traffic laws." Hayes' jaw tightened. "This vehicle matches the description of a stolen car reported in this area. I need you to step out." Now, Elijah's heart sank. He knew exactly what was happening. He had seen this pattern 1,000 times in his courtroom, a pretextual stop based on bias disguised as probable cause. "Officer," Elijah said carefully, "I can assure you this vehicle is not stolen. It's registered in my name. I can provide documentation." "Out of the car," Hayes shouted, his hand now gripping his weapon. Elijah took a breath. He opened the door slowly and stepped out, his hands raised at shoulder height. "I'm a federal judge," Elijah said firmly but respectfully. "My name is Elijah Sterling. I'm reaching into my jacket pocket to retrieve my judicial credentials. I'm doing so slowly." Hayes didn't wait. He grabbed Elijah's arm and spun him around violently. "I don't care if you're the King of England," Hayes barked, the exact phrase captured on body camera. "Hands behind your back." Elijah's voice remained steady. Officer Hayes, I can see your nameplate. I'm informing you that this stop lacks probable cause. The stolen vehicle report you're referencing was cleared 2 days ago. I'm asking you to verify. Hayes cut him off. You think you can lawyer your way out of this? Hands behind your back. What happened next was captured in excruciating detail on Officer Hayes' body camera. Hayes forced Elijah's hands behind his back and slapped handcuffs on his wrists, tight enough that they left marks. He pushed Elijah toward the back of the BMW and forced him to sit on the curb. By now, neighbors had begun to notice. Mrs. Callahan, who lived 3 doors down from the Sterlings, stepped onto her porch. She recognized Judge Sterling immediately. "Garrett, what are you doing?" she called out. "That's Judge Sterling." Hayes ignored her. Elijah sat on the curb, handcuffed, in his own neighborhood. Cars slowed down. People stared. Teenagers pulled out their phones and started recording. Hayes called in the vehicle identification number. The response came back within 90 seconds. No active stolen vehicle report. Registration valid. Owned by Elijah Marcus Sterling. No warrants. No flags. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. Unit 23, that vehicle is clear. Repeat, vehicle is not stolen. Registration matches the driver. For a moment, Hayes froze. The body camera captured his face, a flicker of realization, then defensiveness. But instead of immediately releasing Judge Sterling and apologizing, Hayes doubled down. "I still need to verify his identity," Hayes said into his radio. Elijah, still sitting on the curb, spoke quietly but firmly. "Officer Hayes, you've just been informed that my vehicle is not stolen. You have my name. You can verify my judicial status with a single phone call. You've violated my Fourth Amendment rights. I'm asking you to remove these handcuffs." Hayes leaned down. The body camera captured what he said next, words that would be replayed in court, on news broadcasts, and in training seminars across the country. "You think that fancy suit and that federal badge make you special? Out here, you're just another guy who doesn't belong." Another patrol car pulled up. Officer Lisa Mendez stepped out. She had been on the force for 6 years and had a reputation for de-escalation. Mendez immediately recognized Judge Sterling. Her eyes widened. "Garrett," she said urgently, "that's Judge Sterling. Federal bench. What's going on?" Hayes bristled. "I had probable cause. Stolen vehicle report." Mendez checked her tablet. That report was cleared on Thursday. This is his car. It's registered to him. She walked over to Elijah, who was still handcuffed on the curb. "Your Honor," Mendez said quietly, "I'm so sorry. Let me get those cuffs off you." She removed the handcuffs. Elijah stood slowly, rubbing his wrists. His face was composed, but his eyes betrayed the pain, not physical pain, but the deeper wound of being treated like a criminal in his own neighborhood. Hayes stood off to the side, his arms crossed, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Elijah looked at him. "Officer Hayes, I want your badge number, I want your supervisor's name, and I want a copy of that body camera footage." Hayes didn't respond. Mendez handed Elijah her card. "Your Honor, I'll make sure you receive everything. I'll file a report immediately." Elijah nodded. He got back into his BMW. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage. The kind of rage that comes from being reduced to a stereotype despite a lifetime of achievement. He drove home. He walked through his front door, and he sat down in his study for a long time, staring at the wall, wondering how a man who had dedicated his life to justice could be denied that very same justice on a Saturday afternoon in his own neighborhood. The witnesses. Over the next 48 hours, 7 neighbors came forward with statements. Mrs. Callahan, who had called out from her porch, described the encounter as shocking and unnecessary. A teenager who recorded part of the incident on his phone posted it online, where it quickly went viral. The hashtag Justice for Judge Sterling began trending. Media outlets picked up the story. Legal analysts expressed outrage. Civil rights organizations called for an immediate investigation. And Judge Elijah Sterling made a decision. He wasn't going to let this go. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every black man who had been pulled over for driving while black. Every professional who had been treated like a suspect. Every person who had been denied dignity because of the color of their skin. He was going to take Officer Garrett Hayes and the system that protected him to court. Pause for a second. If you believe body cameras save lives and expose the truth, smash that like button right now. Also, comment justice if you think this officer got what he deserved. I read every single comment and I want to hear your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. The moment reality hit. In the immediate aftermath of the stop, Officer Garrett Hayes thought he had gotten away with it. He returned to the precinct, filed a report claiming reasonable suspicion based on a stolen vehicle report, and went home. But by Sunday morning, everything had changed. The viral video had been viewed over 2 million times. News outlets were calling it one of the most egregious examples of racial profiling involving a high-ranking official. Legal experts were already predicting that Hayes' career was over. At 9:00 a.m. on Monday, May 16th, Hayes was called into the office of Captain Raymond Torres, the precinct commander. Torres didn't mince words. You handcuffed a federal judge on a bogus stolen car report that had been cleared 2 days earlier. Do you understand the magnitude of what you've done? Hayes tried to defend himself. I was following protocol. I had information about a stolen vehicle. You had outdated information that you didn't bother to verify, Torres interrupted. You ignored his credentials. You made statements on body camera that demonstrate clear racial bias. And you humiliated a man who has more legal authority than anyone in this building. Hayes' face went pale. I didn't know he was a judge. Torres leaned forward. That's the problem, Garrett. It shouldn't have mattered. You should have treated him with respect, whether he was a judge, a janitor, or a CEO. But you didn't. Because you saw a black man in a nice car and assumed he didn't belong, Hayes was suspended immediately, without pay, pending a full investigation. The media firestorm. Within 72 hours, the story had become national news. CNN ran a segment titled, Driving While Black, Federal Judge's Arrest Exposes Systemic Bias. MSNBC interviewed former prosecutors who had appeared before Judge Sterling, all of whom described him as brilliant, fair, and deeply respected. The Washington Post published an op-ed written by a sitting Supreme Court justice. If a federal judge can be treated this way, what hope do ordinary citizens have? Civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump offered to represent Judge Sterling pro bono. The NAACP issued a statement calling for Hayes' termination and criminal charges, and Judge Elijah Sterling remained silent. For 2 weeks, he made no public statements. He returned to his courtroom and continued presiding over cases with the same professionalism and dignity he had always shown. But behind the scenes, his legal team was building a case. The power shift. On June 1, 2022, 18 days after the incident, Judge Sterling's attorney, Valerie Hartman, filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against Officer Garrett Hayes and the Fairfax County Police Department. The lawsuit alleged violation of the Fourth Amendment, racial profiling, excessive force, emotional distress, violation of civil rights under 42 U.S.C. 1983. The complaint was 47 pages long and meticulously detailed. It included a complete timeline of the stop, transcripts of the body camera footage, internal police records showing Hayes' history of complaints, expert testimony from constitutional law scholars, witness statements from 7 neighbors, data showing that Hayes had disproportionately stopped black drivers throughout his career. The lawsuit sought compensatory and punitive damages. It didn't specify an amount, it simply asked a jury to determine what justice looked like. The moment the lawsuit was filed, the power dynamic shifted completely. Officer Garrett Hayes, who had stood over Judge Sterling with handcuffs and contempt, was now the defendant. And Judge Elijah Sterling, who had sat on a curb in his own neighborhood, was now the plaintiff. The police department immediately tried to settle. They offered $150,000. Judge Sterling's legal team rejected it within an hour. They offered $300,000. Rejected. They offered $500,000 and a public apology. Rejected. Valerie Hartman made the position clear in a press conference. This case is not about money. It's about accountability. It's about sending a message that no officer is above the law. We're going to trial Hayes' desperation. Garrett Hayes hired a defense attorney, Marcus Brennan, a former police union lawyer known for defending officers in excessive force cases. Brennan's strategy was predictable: argue that Hayes had acted in good faith based on the information available to him at the time. But the evidence was overwhelming. The body camera footage destroyed any claim of good faith. Hayes' statement, "You think that fancy suit and that federal badge make you special? Out here, you're just another guy who doesn't belong," was impossible to explain away. Internal logs proved that the stolen vehicle report had been cleared 48 hours before the stop. Hayes' history of complaints, which the department had tried to bury, was now public record. And Judge Sterling's reputation, 15 years of impeccable service, unanimous respect from colleagues, a career defined by fairness, made him the perfect plaintiff. Brennan tried to get the case dismissed. Motion denied. He tried to suppress the body camera footage. Motion denied. He tried to argue that Sterling's status as a federal judge was irrelevant. The judge, not Elijah Sterling, but the judge presiding over the civil case, responded, "The plaintiff's occupation is relevant to the extent that it demonstrates the defendant's disregard for clearly established constitutional rights." Motion denied. By the time the trial date was set, Garrett Hayes knew he was going to lose. The only question was how badly. The internal affairs investigation, even before the lawsuit was filed, the Fairfax County Police Department launched an internal affairs investigation. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. The public pressure was immense. The investigation was led by Lieutenant Sarah Kim, a 20-year veteran known for her thoroughness and integrity. She was given full access to body camera footage, dispatch records, internal communications, and Hayes' personnel file. What she found was damning. Over his 12-year career, Officer Garrett Hayes had conducted 1,247 traffic stops. Of those stops, 62% involved Black or Latino drivers, in a district where those demographics represented only 28% of the population. Hayes had used force in 34 encounters. 31 of those encounters involved people of color. He had arrested drivers for resisting arrest on 18 occasions, despite no underlying offense other than the traffic stop itself. Lieutenant Kim's report, completed on June 15, 2022, concluded, "Officer Hayes has demonstrated a clear pattern of racial bias and excessive force. His conduct on May 14, 2022, was consistent with this pattern and represents a severe violation of department policy and constitutional law." The report recommended immediate termination. The body camera footage analysis. The body camera footage became the centerpiece of both the internal investigation and the lawsuit. Judge Sterling's legal team hired Dr. Marcus Webb, a forensic psychologist and expert in implicit bias. Dr. Webb analyzed the footage frame by frame, second by second. His findings were presented in a detailed expert report. At 2:49 p.m., Officer Hayes' initial approach showed elevated suspicion inconsistent with a routine traffic stop. His body language, hand on weapon, aggressive posture indicated he had already profiled the driver as a threat. At 2:51 p.m., Hayes' refusal to allow Sterling to retrieve his documents demonstrated a preconceived assumption of danger based on racial bias rather than objective threat assessment. At 2:53 p.m., Hayes' statement, "I don't care if you're the King of England," revealed contempt for the driver's identity and status, consistent with racial animus. At 2:54 p.m., the use of handcuffs after the stolen vehicle report had been cleared constituted punitive action rather than lawful detention. At 2:56 p.m., Hayes' statement, "You think that fancy suit and that federal badge make you special? Out here, you're just another guy who doesn't belong," was explicit evidence of racial profiling and bias. Dr. Webb concluded, Officer Hayes' actions were not the result of a split-second decision or reasonable mistake. They were the product of ingrained racial bias that overrode his training, his duty, and his oath to uphold the Constitution. Witness testimony collection. 7 neighbors provided sworn statements to Judge Sterling's legal team. Mrs. Eleanor Callahan, age 67, retired teacher. "I've known Judge Sterling for 6 years. He's one of the most respected members of our community. When I saw him sitting on that curb in handcuffs, I was horrified. Officer Hayes completely ignored me when I told him who Judge Sterling was. It was clear he had no interest in the truth." Marcus Liu, age 17, high school student. "I recorded part of it on my phone. The officer was super aggressive from the start. Judge Sterling was calm and respectful the whole time, but the officer treated him like a criminal. It was messed up." Dr. Paul Henderson, age 52, cardiologist. "I've lived in Riverside Heights for 15 years. I've never seen an officer treat anyone the way Officer Hayes treated Judge Sterling. It was humiliating and completely unnecessary. The statements were consistent. Judge Sterling had done nothing to provoke the encounter. Officer Hayes had been the aggressor from the beginning." Federal involvement. Because Judge Sterling was a federal official, the incident triggered a parallel investigation by the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Federal investigators reviewed the Fairfax County Police Department's policies, training protocols, and disciplinary records. They interviewed officers, supervisors, and community members. Their preliminary findings, released in August 2022, identified systemic deficiencies in accountability and oversight that had allowed officers like Hayes to engage in racially biased policing without meaningful consequences. The DOJ report noted the department's failure to address Officer Hayes' pattern of complaints created an environment where constitutional violations were tolerated rather than corrected. The federal investigation would continue for months, eventually leading to a consent decree requiring the department to implement sweeping reforms. The defense's collapse. As the evidence mounted, Officer Hayes' defense attorney, Marcus Brennan, faced an impossible task. Every strategy he attempted fell apart. He tried to argue that Hayes had reasonable suspicion based on the stolen vehicle report, but the prosecution produced dispatch logs showing the report had been cleared 2 days earlier and that Hayes had access to that information. He tried to argue that Hayes had feared for his safety, but the body camera footage showed Judge Sterling with his hands on the steering wheel, calm and cooperative. He tried to argue that Hayes' comments were taken out of context, but there was no context that could excuse "you're just another guy who doesn't belong." By September 2022, Brennan privately advised Hayes to settle. "If this goes to trial," Brennan warned, "the jury is going to crucify you." Hayes refused. He believed, wrongly, that his 12 years on the force would count for something, that the jury would side with a cop over a wealthy judge. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Officer Hayes, immediate consequences. On June 20th, 2022, 37 days after the incident, the Fairfax County Police Department held a disciplinary hearing. Officer Garrett Hayes was terminated for cause. The termination letter, which became part of the public record, stated, Officer Hayes' actions on May 14, 2022, constituted gross misconduct, violation of department policy, and infringement of constitutional rights. His conduct brought disrepute to the department and demonstrated unfitness for continued employment in law enforcement. Hayes lost his badge. He lost his gun. He lost his pension. 12 years of contributions, gone. The police union initially tried to fight the termination, but public pressure and the overwhelming evidence forced them to back down. Hayes appealed the termination through the civil service system. His appeal was denied in November 2022. The civil rights lawsuit went to trial in October 2023, 17 months after the incident. The trial was held in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. The presiding judge was Judge Patricia Moreno, a colleague of Judge Sterling's on the federal bench. The trial lasted 9 days. Day 1-2, opening statements and witness testimony. Valerie Hartman, representing Judge Sterling, delivered an opening statement that set the tone. This case is about a fundamental question. Are we all equal under the law? Or does your skin color determine how you're treated by those sworn to protect you? On May 14, 2022, Judge Elijah Sterling, a man who has dedicated his life to upholding the Constitution, was denied the very rights that Constitution guarantees. Not because he broke the law, but because Officer Garrett Hayes saw a black man in a nice car and decided he didn't belong. The defense argued that Hayes had acted in good faith and that the stop was unfortunate but lawful. Judge Sterling testified on day 2. His testimony was quiet, measured, and devastating. I've presided over hundreds of cases involving police misconduct, he said. I've seen body camera footage of officers making split-second decisions in dangerous situations. What happened to me on May 14th was not a split-second decision. It was a choice. Officer Hayes chose to see me as a threat rather than a citizen. He chose to ignore my credentials. He chose to humiliate me in my own neighborhood, and he made those choices because of the color of my skin. The courtroom was silent. The body camera footage was played in its entirety. Jurors watched as Officer Hayes refused to listen, escalated the encounter, and made explicitly biased statements. Several jurors were visibly emotional. Dr. Marcus Webb, the forensic psychologist, testified about implicit bias and racial profiling. He walked the jury through Hayes's pattern of stops and use of force. This was not an isolated incident, Dr. Webb testified. This was the predictable result of years of biased policing that the department failed to address. Day 6-7. Defense witnesses. The defense called 3 witnesses, 2 former colleagues of Hayes and a use of force expert. Under cross-examination, both colleagues admitted that Hayes had a reputation for being aggressive and hard to work with. The use of force expert's testimony fell apart when he conceded that handcuffing Judge Sterling after the stolen vehicle report had been cleared was not justified. Day 8. Closing arguments. Valerie Hartman's closing argument was powerful. The defense wants you to believe this was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But the evidence shows something different. It shows a pattern, a choice. A man who wore a badge and believed that badge gave him the right to treat people, black people, as suspects rather than citizens. Judge Sterling did everything right that day, and he was still handcuffed and humiliated. If that can happen to a federal judge, it can happen to anyone. Your verdict will send a message. You get to decide what that message is. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. On October 19, 2023, the jury returned a verdict in favor of Judge Elijah Sterling. They awarded him $910,000 in damages. The breakdown: $160,000 in compensatory damages for emotional distress and violation of constitutional rights, $750,000 in punitive damages designed to punish Officer Hayes and deter future misconduct. When the verdict was read, Judge Sterling closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. His wife, Dr. Nia Sterling, squeezed his hand. Officer Garrett Hayes sat motionless, his face ashen. Outside the courthouse, Valerie Hartman addressed the media. This verdict is not just about Judge Sterling. It's about every person who has been racially profiled, every person who has been told they don't belong, every person who has been denied dignity. The jury sent a clear message today: there are consequences for violating people's rights, and no badge is a shield for racism. Systemic impact and reform. The verdict triggered immediate action. Fairfax County Police Department reforms. Within 30 days of the verdict, the department announced sweeping policy changes, mandatory implicit bias training, all officers required to complete 40 hours of bias training annually, early warning system, automated tracking of officers with patterns of complaints or biased stops. Body camera policy, all footage from stops involving use of force to be reviewed by supervisors within 48 hours. Community Oversight Board, creation of a civilian review board with subpoena power. Discipline transparency, public reporting of all disciplinary actions. Against officers. Federal consent decree. In January 2024, the DOJ announced a consent decree requiring the Fairfax County Police Department to implement additional reforms under federal oversight, including independent audits of traffic stop data to identify racial disparities, revised use of force policies with stricter accountability, enhanced de-escalation training, mandatory psychological evaluations for officers with multiple complaints. Legislative action. The Virginia State Legislature introduced the Elijah Sterling Act in February 2024, which would require statewide body camera, footage retention for all stops involving use of force, create a public database of officer misconduct, limit qualified immunity protections for officers who violate clearly established constitutional rights. The bill passed in May 2024 with bipartisan support. Hayes' final punishment. Garrett Hayes was personally liable for the $910,000 judgment. He declared bankruptcy in December 2023. He attempted to find work in private security but was rejected by every company he applied to. The case had made him unhireable. In March 2024, Hayes gave a single interview to a local news station. He offered a half-hearted apology. "I made a mistake. I should have handled things differently. I never meant to hurt anyone." When asked if he believed he had racially profiled Judge Sterling, Hayes refused to answer. He has not worked in law enforcement since. Judge Sterling's vindication. Judge Elijah Sterling returned to the bench immediately after the verdict. He continued to preside over cases with the same professionalism and fairness that had defined his career. In December 2023, he donated the entire $910,000 verdict to the ACLU and the National Association of Black Judges to fund legal defense for victims of police misconduct. "This was never about the money," Judge Sterling said in a statement. "It was about principle. It was about making sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to others. If this verdict saves even one person from being humiliated the way I was, it was worth it." In March 2024, Judge Sterling was invited to speak at the National Conference on Criminal Justice Reform. His speech, titled "Equal Justice Under Law, A Promise Unfulfilled," received a standing ovation. He remains on the federal bench today, a symbol of dignity, resilience, and the ongoing fight for true equality under the law. If this story proves that accountability matters, do 3 things right now. Smash that like button, subscribe to this channel for more stories of justice, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and comment below, do you think body cameras should be mandatory for all officers? Let's discuss. The story of Judge Elijah Sterling and Officer Garrett Hayes is a story that should never have happened. But it did, and it continues to happen, in different forms in different cities every single day. According to data from the Stanford Open Policing Project, Black drivers are 20% more likely to be stopped by police than white drivers. They're twice as likely to be searched. And they're far more likely to experience use of force during routine encounters. Judge Sterling was lucky in one sense. He had the resources, the legal knowledge, and the platform to fight back. But how many people don't? How many people are pulled over, handcuffed, humiliated, and sent on their way with no recourse? How many people don't have body camera footage to prove what happened? How many people don't have $910,000 verdicts to validate their experience? The answer is too many. Body cameras are essential, but they're not enough. We need accountability. We need consequences. We need a system that doesn't just punish officers after the damage is done, but prevents that damage from happening in the first place. We need training that addresses implicit bias. We need oversight boards with real power. We need a cultural shift within law enforcement that values de-escalation over domination, that sees service over suspicion, that recognizes that a badge is a responsibility, not a license to discriminate. Judge Elijah Sterling said it best, "I spend my life protecting the Constitution." On that afternoon, the Constitution didn't protect me. That has to change. And the only way it changes is if we demand it, if we speak up, if we hold those in power accountable, if we refuse to accept that this is just the way things are. The $910,000 verdict wasn't just a number. It was a message that says, you don't get to treat people this way. Not anymore. Not without consequences. This is your channel for real stories of justice and accountability. Stories that matter. Stories that make a difference. Until next time, stay informed, stay aware, and always, always demand accountability. This has been the story of the bench and the badge. Justice was served.